Perfect. Well, thank you, and welcome everyone to Building Your Organizational Structure Right. Our objective today is that we focus on defining the right roles to move your organization forward. And, there's a series of things that you need to do in order to make sure you've got the right people on your bus, your organizational bus. And this webinar for today is focusing on three main components related to building your organizational structure right. There's a series of other things as well that, a future webinar will address for you. However, today we're really focusing on these three main learning objectives. Number one is when and how to define what roles are needed. With working with the different business owners that I work with, and whether or not they're for-profit or not-for-profit, that is sometimes one of the toughest questions to answer is, so when do I and how do I define the roles that I need? Especially in organizations that have started with one or two individuals, you come to a point where you need to decide, okay, so how do we grow? What roles do I need to be bringing in? And we're going to talk about that today so that you can get some insights as to what you need to be thinking about when you're making those decisions. Another real challenge, and it's directly related to those roles that you are defining, is making sure that you have a job description that works. And creating a really valid job description is a combination of an art and a science. And we're going to talk about that today as well, because that will simplify once you've made the decision to bring someone on board, that they understand what's required from them. In my experience with working with business owners, I hear a lot, well, that's not what I brought them on board to do. That's not what I brought this employee on to do. And when I question, well, what is their job description? Well, many cases there isn't one, and it could be a paragraph if there is one, but it's missing some very key components. So it's very difficult to expect someone to do a role when it's not properly defined what the role is, so, and a proper description related to that. So we're going to talk more about that when we get into that learning objective today. And then the third one is defining the hard and soft skills. And this is when we look at, we've defined what the role is, we've identified a job description. So now what we need to do is we need to take apart that job description and look at the hard and soft skills. And we're going to talk about what we mean with that when we get to that particular part. So before we start, though, there's a couple of other things that you actually have to have established so that you can make sure that you are defining the roles and they come on board well too. So the first one is that your organization should have a really clear mission. And a mission answers three questions. What do we do? For whom do we do it? And what is the benefit? And that is really important to make sure that you're really clear in outlining what your mission is in terms of the answers to these three questions, because you're going to be making sure that the roles that you require support what we do, for whom we do it for, as one piece. But the other reason is you want to make sure that the individuals that you are bringing on board to fill these roles, to do what we do and for whom we do it, you also want to make sure that they understand what the organization is all about, because you want them to align with what your mission is. The second piece, or part two, is how we do it. So and this actually gives you some guidance into being able to determine what are the roles that you actually require in your organization. So a lot of people will say, well, what does a typical organization have? And we are going to be talking about that in a couple of moments. But we also need to be asking ourselves, so how do we exactly deliver our product, our service? How do we do it? So whether or not, again, you're not for profit or whether or not you're for profit, you're going to go through the same process. I call this a customer/client delivery model. So how do we get the orders in, the phone calls in? How do we process what it is that we have? And how do we deliver our product and services? Those are the three basic buckets. Most organizations will have a customer-client delivery model that's much, much longer, that starts defining more of the specific kinds of steps, which then ultimately turn into responsibilities that need to be assigned to someone as their role. Hence why I'm recommending this is one of the things that you do define, before you start. There's a whole bunch of other reasons as well, but I can assure you, just in terms of being able to make sure that you are looking at your entire organization, because one of the challenges when you are ready to expand and to bring people on board, you want to make sure that you've got the right roles that they can fit into. And you can't, go from having a handful of employees to having 20 and 30 employees overnight. You want to make sure that you're bringing in the right ones to do the right roles. So going through this exercise before you start is going to give you some insights to make sure that you are in fact looking at what your organization needs to do. And you'd be surprised how evident it becomes then what the next role should be that you hire for when you start looking at your organization through that lens. So, when and how to define what roles are needed? Well, the answer to that is simply when it makes sense to. So, I'm not, saying this, with any other intention other than when it makes sense to is a very broad answer. So let's now start digging into when it makes sense to. So there's two pieces to this. There's a logical approach, right? The very logical approach, and we're going to be talking about what some of those logical requirements are. And then there also is the gut feel. However, there's only so much money that an organization can spend on employees and expanding their business with adding in more headcount. So we want to err more on the side of logic, that we're evaluating our organization, we're evaluating our business so that we can make sure it's the right thing to do. So doesn't mean that gut feel isn't important, but as far as when we first begin looking at, so how do I figure out when I need to expand and how to do it, let's focus on a very logical approach first. So here are some of the reasons when it makes sense to. So you could tick off all of these boxes. You could be ticking off one or two of these boxes, but even by you thinking through each of these steps, it's going to become more apparent for you as well as to what it is in terms of the role that you actually need. So let's talk about growth. So let's say your organization is growing. The demand is growing and it's trending to continue. So it's not a blip. It's not a blip. It's something which you have stepped back and you've looked and you've seen that your demand is growing. You've had consistent increase in activity month over month, quarter over quarter, and you're looking out into your external environment, your external market, your external landscape, and you've determined this is not going away. So obviously it's going to make sense to then expand to address the growth. Now, depending on what the growth is, you may have enough people that are in your organization that will are bringing in the orders or bringing in the phone calls, or you have enough people on the street that are filling your sales funnel or the activity, what you do, what you need to bring in so that you can produce a product or service. And you may say, I have enough people that are bringing stuff in, but I need more people to be able to handle the internal piece of it. So now we begin to get a little bit more clarity as to what the roles are that we are needing to do. And especially if we've done our work and outlined what our customer and delivery model is, it allows us to outline there where the pressure points that we expect are going to be because of the result of that demand growing. So it gives us some insights then to say, oh, this particular area of what we do in our client customer delivery model is really going to be affected by this increase in demand. So I need to make sure then the role I'm bringing in is going to be able to address that. So you could also have an opportunity. So you are looking and you've identified a new business area, a new channel that you want to get into, and you've done your research and determined that this is an area that you want to grow into. So this, of course, would then require to have roles and resources assigned to be able to fulfill that. So that would be an example of when it makes sense too. Competitive advantage. So maybe you're an organization that you are being very aware of your competitive surroundings, and you want to make sure that you are maintaining your position and continuing to protect and grow in versus the competition. So you may need to make changes to your organizational structure to adjust roles and to bring in new roles that are going to allow you to maintain, sustaining, and protecting your competitive edge. You'll see organizations do this, especially when they're wanting to increase their competitive advantage or they're wanting to deepen their customer experience, their client experience, because they know that that can be a competitive advantage for them. So these would be organizations then that would be looking to enhance their customer facing roles, customer service, for example. Employee feedback. So employee feedback is when it makes sense to, when you are hearing from your employee or your employees that we've got too much work to do and we're not getting time in order to get things done. It could be that, which would be where there's a need then to bring in more employees, but it also could be that if, especially with smaller organizations, it could be that you've had a handful of employees that are doing a multitude of different roles, and it could be that one component of those roles, or two components, three, there could be a component of their job, which is where they're seeing a lot of pressure on. In either case, you always want to make sure that your feedback that you're getting from your employees is legitimate and validated. So this is when you may be getting into some time studies, keeping track of their time, keeping track of their calls, keeping track of what it is they do. And you want to do that because that's going to then validate for you. Well, it's going to isolate, first of all, where it is the majority of activities, but it's also going to validate for you then what role that you're going to have to create in order to affect positively then the feedback that, hey, we've got too much on our plate, and to define what resource they're going to need. And often, especially when you have a couple of employees or a few employees that are, giving you this feedback, you're going to be able to create a role then based on this analysis of looking at where they're spending their time and the volume that they have to be able to create the right role then that you need. Of course, if there's an issue with them just getting through to the existing volume that they have. So this will happen often when you have an employee that's responsible for particular responsibilities and the organization has grown so much that they can't handle the volume that's coming in. So, when you do have an individual that's picking up the phone and there's more phone calls coming in, well, of course, because the person can only pick up so many calls at once. Similarly, if you're thinking about any of the transaction-oriented areas inside your business. If you've got somebody that is responsible for processing payments and there's more payments coming in and you've reviewed every process improvement to get those payments coming in more efficiently, then yes, the more payments you have coming in, that ultimately you may also need to expand your payment receipt clerks or your accounts receivable people. New skill knowledge need. Let's talk about that one for a minute. So this is when it is, and it could be a need that comes up that's related to an opportunity. It could be a need that's related to competitive advantage. It could be a need that you've established that, hey, in order for my organization to move forward, we need to get better in. And an example like this is social media. Like social media for a lot of organizations is a new skill and knowledge need that they have. And they don't necessarily have the people on board to be able to do that with. Another example would be HR. So an organization that is growing with employees is probably going to require a dedicated HR effort, where often it'll start with delegating the HR responsibilities around to a bunch of different individuals in the organization, or often it'll sit with the finance person or the ops person. So that's an example where, hey, you know what? We're growing to the point now that we need to bring someone in that is going to be able to do HR for us full time. Bookkeeping and accounting is another example where, we've gotten by with having the office manager or the office clerk to do the bookkeeping that we need, but we've got so much activity now, we need to really consider bringing in a full-time bookkeeper or part-time bookkeeper. So those are examples of what I mean with new skill and knowledge need. And higher value work. So what I mean with that one is, and this is especially true for organizations that are starting small and are now at that busting at the seams piece of it, what we want to do is we always want to look at what we do and make sure that we're focusing on the higher value work, the work that we are contributing the best in our skills and our knowledge as well. And when our business starts to grow and we realize that we need to be bringing in resource to help us, outside of it requiring different skill or knowledge, we probably want to be making sure that we're focusing on our higher value work so that we have more time to do that higher value work, and then look at creating a role to alleviate the pressure and get the lower value work done, the more clerical work done that isn't as much requiring as much involvement as my business or my organization grows to free me up so I can do higher value work. So that would be when it makes sense to too. And you never want to give up your higher value work at first, especially if you've got the area of expertise or the people that you have the extra area of expertise. You actually want them to be doing more of that. What you want to take away from them are the lower value work, and that would be the role that you would create around with that. So that's where you see organizations bringing in clerks, bringing in assistants, bringing in coordinators to help support the higher value work needs that need to be done. And last but not least is the bottom line ROI. At the end of the day, your business, your organization could be doing really well. You have money that's coming in. You can choose to keep it inside the business, or you could also choose or you could also use it in order to expand and bring in more resources. And there's some business and organizations that do this when they say, okay, you know what, I'm done working my 60, 70 hours a week. I want to take it down to 40 hours. We've got the income coming in. Our bottom line's healthy. I can now afford to be able to bring someone in or people in to be able to help in all these roles or the roles that we have been doing. So those are the when it makes sense too. So I'd like to just share with you quickly a typical organization structure. So this is a typical organization structure, very, very basic. So generally companies will have a head, and whether or not you're for profit or not for profit, there's always a president and CEO usually. And often there will be an assistant. And the typical functions are sales and marketing, customer service, operations, finance, and HR. So these are the typical functions that an organization will have. And often people will say, well, shouldn't I just be, working on then bringing in people to fill a typical organization? Well, that is one way of doing it, but I would never do it without first doing my client customer delivery model, because I want to see where I have my pressure points in there. And then I want to be able to define the role that I need. And then I'm going to figure out where it is that they fit into my organizational structure. So I may be building out my customer service piece first, or I might be building out my ops first, or maybe I'm building out my sales and marketing first. And by us going back into a typical organizational structure, we can then take this role that we're defining we need and make sure we put it in the right area of the business where it belongs. And then you'll see as you grow your business, okay, so I've got a person now in my customer service, or I have two people in my customer service. I've got issues again, or we've got opportunities to grow with, or growth opportunities. Let me look to see what else I need. Okay, now it's time for me because I need to grow, so I need salespeople. I'm going to be focusing on my sales. And then you start building out your sales roles that you need. Okay, so let's do a quick little check-in here. So what you always want to do when you're going through this decision-making process of determining what roles and when and how to decide what roles, you always want to ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, what will happen if I don't hire? So what will happen if you don't hire that particular role or roles that you have defined? So just going through that question, and sometimes, if you've got a series of roles that you think you need, you want to be asking this question for each of those roles and then comparing the answers between them and seeing which is the one that is the strongest need, which will obviously be that it would be a very big impact of what would happen if we don't hire. Can I outsource? That's another thing you want to think about. A lot of organizations will outsource certain roles and certain roles in their organization, or certain components related to the roles in their organization, while they are sorting out what their actual needs are. A lot of organizations will not immediately bring a salesperson on board. Instead, they may use an agent. So that's an example of outsourcing. It happens on the HR side. It happens on the accounting side as well. So you want to ask yourself, okay, can I outsource this? Do I have to bring in an employee full-time or part-time, or can I outsource? Contract versus employee. That's the other thought process. So one of my clients wasn't sure about needing a full-time receptionist. So I said, all right, so then let's go after a contract for 6 months and determine whether or not you in fact need, because the information wasn't all there, and they were wanting to make sure that they had very strong customer service, so they wanted to make sure the phone was being picked up right away, but they weren't sure exactly what the call volume was, because their phone system didn't give them that analysis. And there's a couple of other needs they had. So they said, okay, well, so I don't have to hire full-time right out of the gates. I said, no, you don't. You can actually hire a contract employee, right? Now, depending on what province you're in, there's all rules and regulations around contract employee, because the federal government doesn't want you just to be building your organization based on contract employees. They want you to have employees. There's lots of incentives and grants for you to hire employees with, but they also want to make sure that your employees are employed, because then that way they are protected under the Employment Standard Act, as well as there's also other benefits for being a full-time or being a permanent part-time employee as well. So, be aware of what your contract regulations are related to your, if you're thinking about going contract way. Certainly if the position is one which your organization is going to need, you can use a contract approach to get started. And often you'll see this in job postings where people will be recruiting for a contract with the possibility of converting into full-time. So that would be an example of where an organization is using it in order to test out whether or not they actually have a employee requirement for that particular role. And the other point on here is employee involvement. So if you are an organization that have employees today, engage them, involve them. Say, you know what, I feel we're busting at the seams, or we're growing, or whatever the reasons are of that making sense list resonate with you, and get their involvement. It's going to help you in the long run for a variety of reasons. It's going to make sure that they understand that they're not They're not wondering what it is that's getting going on, and getting nervous or worried about their own job security. There could be an opportunity for one of these employees to let you know, hey, I know someone that would be a great fit for our organization and has the skills of what it is you're looking for. So you want to make sure that you do get employee engagement when it is that you are looking to also expand your organization. So what are the 5 things that you need to do before you start recruiting? Number 1, you need to define what would be the major job duties and the responsibilities and tasks of the role. And we're going to go through a little exercise with that so you can see what it is I mean with that. You also want to make sure that that reporting relationship is is clear. So that's when populating your organizational chart so that individual knows where they and who it is that they go to. You're also going to see where it is that I insert that on the job description. We need to also make sure that we're clear with what the skill and knowledge levels the job actually requires to do. So we're going to be focusing on 1, 2, and 3, as well as 5, with creating a job description and creating a job description. The posting is just pulls right off of your job description, so it's not difficult to do. But we are going to be covering 1, 2, 3, and 5 today. Researching what is the range of compensation for the job you need to do before you begin actual recruiting, but you don't have to do it necessarily to get the posting out. So as long as you know that you have money to pay for this position and you've done a little bit of research in terms of what you have on an hourly rate, if it's an hourly employee or a salary that you believe that your business can afford, your organization can afford, I wouldn't get too caught up on doing a lot of research for the range, because you can do that concurrently once the posting is out. Because I believe in sending postings out where we're always inviting the potential candidate to let us know what their expectations are. I'd rather have them tell you than you tell them and then they say yes when it's really a no. Okay, so that's just a little tip there. So let's keep going. So another little stop. So at this point then, if we've defined what the role is, now we can at least update our organizational structure. Oh, we're going to be expanding in our sales and marketing area, or we're going to be expanding in admin, or we're going to be expanding in ops or customer service. Again, it's an opportunity to discuss with your employees, if you have employees, what is it you're going to be doing. It's very important for their own job security as well, because they will worry. They're going to want to understand, but also it's going to help when you bring and onboard that employee, that they also understand where they fit into the structure, and your employees understand where this new role will fit into the structure. And you want to establish your timeline. Bringing someone on board in your organization, I always say you hire slow and fire fast. And I don't say that to be, I'm actually saying it because it is the truth. You want to take your time to hire and bring in the right person, but you also want to have a timeline. And generally speaking, if you are hiring someone from another organization, you can bank on it taking anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. And the higher up the role is, the longer it could take. You know, it could take 2 to 6 months to bring the right person on board. So you want to establish your timeline. You don't want to wait till it's too late. You want to be monitoring what's going on inside your business to say, hey, we're getting pretty busy here. It's been now a couple of months. I'm going to make a decision in another month. If this is going to continue, then I need to look at a new role or to create some new roles to make sure that my organization can still move forward. So make sure you're very aware of the timeline and that you don't want to be rushed, because the last thing you want to do is to bring the wrong person on board. Okay, so let's spend a few minutes talking about creating a job description that works. So the first step that you do is you write down the main, what I call buckets, also known as responsibilities. So we can get really sidetracked with creating a job description by getting into minute of detail, like just an unbelievable level of detail. And that's not what we want to do at first. We first want to kind of say, okay, what does this person do? Now, if you're the kind of individual that just starts jotting things down, okay, well, I need them to do this, I need them to do this, I need them to do this, that's okay too. It's okay to do that. All you're going to do is write them all down, and then we're going to create the buckets that they're going to fit into. So whatever your preferred approach is of doing it, you know, I do both ways. Sometimes I start, well, I need this done and this done and this done, and I'm able to define overall main buckets. Or sometimes it's just I'm writing out the actual activities that I need them to do, the main tasks, in which case then I would be then putting them into buckets once I've had a chance to map them out. So one of the most important things when we're doing this is to make sure that we're always assigning an outcome. And what I mean by that is that every bucket should have an overall outcome or an overall statement. The role, the main responsibility for this particular bucket is that. And in the case of point number 4 here, once we've defined the main activities and tasks under each bucket, we also need to then take it one step further, drill down, and assign the appropriate expectation that each of these main activities have. So now we're going to go through an example. So here's an example of a marketing role. So this is an example of a marketing coordinator. That's what I've called this role. So the first thing that I've done is I've separated it into 3 columns. So, and if you'd like to receive a template that guides you through this and you can just populate, just let me know. So we have job components and responsibilities. So that's where I'm outlining the bucket. The main job components is also known as the bucket, and the responsibilities. And then you'll see that underneath each of these main areas, main buckets, I've outlined the steps that have to be taken for that. So the first area is lead generation programs, plan and execute campaigns for lead generation. So there I've outlined the main bucket, which is lead generation programs, and I've outlined what the main outcome is, which is to plan and execute campaigns for lead generation. Then below that, I've outlined the main activities that are required that I want this particular role to be responsible for. So I want them to define, develop, and implement lead gen program, and I want to define drip and follow-up campaign programs. That's what I want them to do. Now let's move over to the column just to the right of that, where it says expectations. Now I am including expectations that I want to see related to that particular component of their job called lead generation program. This is probably one of the most important things to do, because it's one thing to say, I need you to define, develop, and implement lead gen programs, but you need to define what the expectations are. Now, some people like to blend the two together. So they roll expectations in, right, with define, develop, and implement lead gen program along with the expectation to go with it. I like separating it. And the reason why I like separating it is because when you share this and go over this with your new employee that you've got on board, it's going to be very easy for them to, first of all, understand what is required from them in terms of the actual activities, but also it's clear on the expectations. So when they are wanting to, at a glance, pick up what it is that they are responsible for and what the expectation is related to that, it's easy to see. As well as it's very objective, and that's what you want. You know, you always want the rules that you are creating to be clear with what it is that you expect from them, because you're going to be wanting to hold the employee accountable to delivering those expectations. And you also want the employee not to have to guess what are the expectations. You want them to know what those are, so you can also encourage them to achieve them and to exceed in them. And the last column is measurable. So some people like including this. I'm a big believer in including this as well, because I want the employees to self-manage. I want them to know what it is that they're responsible to do, what the expectations are related to that job, but also what the measurable is related to that. So if I'm asking for an annual lead generation plan, then obviously the measurable for that would be the actual lead generation plan. And the more specific then you can get, the better you are. So what I mean by that is where I say annual lead generation plan, I would tighten that up. And I would say annual lead generation plan by January 30th each year, right? Be very specific, because then there is no, well, I wasn't sure exactly what you meant by that. And this is a great tool to use as well with reviewing with your new person, the new role, the new individual that's come in to fill that role, to make sure they're clear on their expectations and what you're going to be using to measure that expectation with. And the tighter you can get, especially when it comes to timelines and frequency, please make sure that you're including that in the expectations. It makes the employee much more aware of what you expect from them. It allows them to self-manage and allows you to also spend less time having to keep reminding them, as opposed to letting them focus on their job description, which outlines for them clearly what their job components and responsibilities are, as well as expectations and timelines. All right, so here is now where I brought it together. So you're going to notice a section on top, which is now got the job title in it. I'm just going to back up one slide here. There we go. So this is just the summary of the job level. So this is now where I'm outlining, I call this a marketing manager, not a marketing coordinator position. Who do they report to? So now I'm identifying who the role reports to. I've also identified where the location is of the role. So, you know, you may have some individuals that work in different areas. You can even have some people that work remotely and out of their homes. So you want to make sure you're clear with where this position actually is located. Travel required, I like including that one in there, especially if the position does require travel, because I want to make sure that the individual in the role, first of all, I got to make sure I'm mentioning and asking this question when I'm doing the recruiting for the role, but I also want to make sure that it's clearly understood that that is one of the requirements if it's necessary for that particular role. Compensation, this is where you can include the base, and if there's any kind of bonus plan, you would put that in there too. And you know, I don't necessarily mean you put in the dollar value, the compensation is base and bonus plan. I've got some clients that like putting in the dollar value, but then we put in a range of what the range is for that particular role. And position type, it's a full-time position. And then you'll see that I've outlined some more information. So overall job objective, the marketing manager will be in charge of lead generation and promotional activities both in traditional and online. This includes the planning, executing, and coordinating the roles and responsibilities detailed below, either personally or through staff and or third-party providers. Role and responsibilities, lead gen programs, marketing communication, and promotion. And lo and behold, when we put it right on top, of what we've outlined in our job components and responsibilities, we now have a job description. Okay, so I hope this helps with being able to make sure that up to now, we know a way to be able to think through when it makes sense to, so we can define the right roles of what we need in our organization. I hope as well that we have outlined the best way to be able to create a good job description. So now let's switch gears and move over into talking about the skill sets that are required. So you can make sure that you are bringing in the right individual in terms of the skill set that you need. So there's three main areas that you need to be focusing on. The first one is the special knowledge. The second one is technical and hard skills. And the third one is soft skills. And when we talk about soft skills, these are more like the attributes that the individual has to bring with them, right? When we're thinking about soft skills, we're thinking about the components that are, not so much black and white defined, if I could call it that. It's more the attributes that the individual is going to bring. So we want to make sure that we're defining what those components are as well, because that's going to be making a big difference when you are doing your interviewing, to make sure that you are uncovering the softer skills as well. I always say to people, it's amazing how many times that I see issues with employees that don't fit. And the reason why they don't fit, it could be that they've got the knowledge and they've got the technical and the hard skills, but they don't fit. Well, when I hear that, that's the soft skill piece of it. That is that, we just weren't on the same page. They just, didn't approach things the same way. They just didn't fit. So let's talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so how does it work? Well, we're going to go back to this job description that we have created. And we're going to look at the responsibility areas that we have already defined. So we have our lead gen, we have our marketing communication, promotion traditional, and we also have our marketing communication and promotion online. So what we want to do now is to identify 3 columns, one that's related to special knowledge required, and one that's related to technical and hard skills required, and one that's listed to soft skills required. So, and that's what I've done in this example. So let's go to the lead generation programs, plan and execute campaigns for lead gen. So what's the special knowledge that's required? Well, they need to have lead generation experience. So now I'm getting some insights into what it is that I'm going to be posting then as what I need for this job. Technical and hard skills, well, I want them to have CRM experience, so a customer relationship management experience. At knowledge and skills, I need them to be working with Microsoft Office and to also have email marketing programs. So that's when you get into things like Constant Contact, for example, MailChimp. Those are all examples of that. And what are the soft skills that I require? I require this individual to have initiative, and I want them also to be accountable. So now I'm starting to formulate what I'm going to need in terms of knowledge, skills, hard and soft, for this particular individual. It's going to be easier for me to create a posting once I've completed this, because then I'm going to summarize based on what my chart tells me. And it allows me to create a posting which outlines the responsibility, and it outlines the skills, the knowledge requirements that I have, the qualifications that I need, the experience that I need, as well as the skills. And now I have directly linked back to what it is that I have defined is the job that I need that is going to support my organization where I need to put the role into. So this is how you do it. And dependent on what it is that you find in your special knowledge column, it's going to then give you the information that you need in order to identify the level of experience that you're going to need, as well as the education that you require for the individual that's going to be assuming this role. So this is what I meant when I said there actually is a very logical approach to doing this, because we start with looking at our organization and where we've got the areas of opportunity by looking at it from the standpoint of that client delivery, that customer delivery model. We're then going to see where it is that we need to define the role and update our organization chart to put it in where it is going to go. We're then going to say, well, okay, what's the job? What are the main buckets that I need for this role to do? I'm going to outline the activities, and I'm going to make sure my expectations are clear on what I need with this. Now I'm going to figure out what are the skills I need to do this job for, because I can't post without knowing those pieces of information. Can't recruit for it. Then I'm going to take those same buckets and those areas of responsibility, and you may break it out more. I mean, I've simplified it here by just focusing on the main buckets. You may find even within some of the activities that I listed on the job description, or the one you're creating, requires some special knowledge that's unique to one particular action or activity versus another. That's okay. You're just going to expand this. And then you're going to analyze it and say, all right, well, there's definitely a trend here. I need someone with strong planning, prioritization, and research skills. And I need someone and then you go through and you're able to summarize what it is that you're going to look for. And rule of thumb is you always want to make sure that you're identifying what you need the most, and you never compromise on bringing someone in. You always want to make sure that that individual can do 80% of what it is that you've hired them in to do. And I'm talking from a skill level especially, right? So special knowledge as well, unless the special knowledge is related to your organization and there's nowhere else that they can learn it. But you want to make sure that you're really thinking in terms of, okay, I want someone, if you want someone coming in with experience, that's different, because you don't want to be compromising on that. But there could be some areas of special knowledge where you say, you know what, I can teach them that. But please don't create a role and then post and bring someone on board that you have to teach them everything. So make sure you've identified what are your non-negotiable areas, the areas that you don't want to compromise on when you are ready to bring in someone to your organization. Okay, so I want to wrap up with some tips, and then also some top mistakes to avoid. So what are some tips? So the tips are that you want to identify the roles you need to support your model, to support your customer client delivery model. And you want to proactively prioritize. So what I mean by that is that you're not just going to do this, when things are really getting out of control and you're busting at the seams. You will also want to be doing this as an active best management practice inside your organization, where you step back and make sure that you know what roles you need to support your model. Now, at first, or as you are growing your organization, you could have one person doing a series of roles, but you still want to know what the roles are that are needed to support your model. And then you can proactively prioritize, because you're going to see where you're going to have some pressure points. And depending on what your landscape is, your external environment is, it's going to become more evident as to where you're going to have to start prioritizing, bringing in, expanding your resources to support the roles you need. So understand why you're hiring for, and understand what you are hiring for and why, being really clear about what the role is. And by the way, I always say to the clients that I work with, is that you don't create a role for a person, you create the role for what your organization needs, and then you find the person to fill it. Okay, so make sure you understand what role you're hiring for, what responsibilities you're hiring for, and why you need. Like, what would happen if we don't hire this role? That question that I had mentioned a little while ago, but one of the things that you should be asking. And engage your existing employees. It's going to help you with the onboarding of any of the new individuals that you're going to be bringing in. So engage them. Engage them. They could even have, as I mentioned, someone that they know that would be a good fit for your organization. What are some of the top mistakes to avoid? Well, number one is not having a customer client delivery model, as opposed to a customer delivery model. That should say customer client delivery model. And spend the time to map it out. By the way, it's a great exercise to do, because from just mapping it out, you're going to uncover areas in your opportunity where you can get better at as well. Not having an organizational chart. A lot of people think that only big corporations have organizations chart. Actually, all organizations should have an organizational chart. It's actually probably even more important in smaller businesses and organizations where you have a multitude of people that are where you don't have a multitude of people, but you do have people that are doing a multitude of things. So it's really important when you have an organization chart that's based on their roles of what they do, because then one individual can look at it and go, oh, so you're also responsible for doing the bookkeeping and also the customer service. Okay, now I see how you fit in. So it's very important to have an organizational chart. Not being clear on the activities the job requires. Well, I need a customer service person, but there's no defining what that customer service person is going to do. How many calls they're supposed to take, how many calls they're supposed to make, what the level of call service is. Do you want them picking up the phone in 5 rings or 3 rings? I know that sounds very minor, but if we're not clear on what the activities the job requires and what the expectations are with it, it's going to be difficult for you to get the results of what it is that you're looking for. And not defining expectations, well, not being clear on the activities, what the job needs to do, and being clear on the expectations, those two go very hand in hand. And you want to be granular to a point. At the end of the day, especially in organizations that are growing, there always will be and other responsibilities as assigned piece, right? But you have to be reasonable with that. But you also want to make sure when you're bringing someone on board, especially if you are growing from a smaller organization, you want to make sure that you bring the person on board to say, this is what we've defined to be the main roles and responsibilities today, but we are growing and we may be making adjustments or requiring you to also get involved in other areas, right? No one is suggesting that this individual should be working more than what is allowed by law in terms of hours in a day. But you do want to make sure that you're building in some flexibility in terms of what their responsibilities could be within that normal workday. And not identifying the true skill sets needed. Oh, well, I thought that they had that experience. Well, did you do a reference check? Did you check? Did you define what experience you needed? Very often I see people hire on gut and that it's a nice person, as opposed to hiring on making sure that the individual has the skills and the knowledge and the experience that they need, right? So we want to make sure that you're identifying the true skill sets that you need, the true knowledge that you need, and that's what you hire on. And if you choose to not go with that particular skill or one component of skill or 2 components of skill or knowledge, that it's a calculated risk, that you're well aware of what it is that you need to have as far as skills go. Okay, so that wraps up our webinar for today. So we spent some time going over when and how to define what roles are needed, because that can be a challenge all on its own. So I hope I gave you some pointers as to how you can logically go through the different reasons why. You may need to expand and bring in and create new roles in your organization. Creating a job description that works. Can't tell you how important that particular part is. And with your existing employees, you also want to make sure that there's job descriptions that work. But certainly, if you haven't done that yet, you want to be doing that right out of the gates with all your new roles that you've defined that you need. And then making sure that you are clearly defining the hard and soft skills and linking it back to that job description that you say you need for the role that you've defined that you need in your organization now. So thank you very much. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email address is epasianotto@focalpointcoaching.com. That's EPASIANOTTO @focalpointcoaching.com. And I'd be pleased to respond to your questions. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for inviting me to do this today. Okay, so as if speaking from us, if somebody was a solopreneur and they're saying, okay, now I need to get some help. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what my customer client delivery model is. So what is it that I do? How I get my product or service into my customers and clients' hand.